Okay, greetings. Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the lunar eclipse that's going to be happening on March 25th, 2024. So first things first, where is this eclipse happening in the zodiac? Look in your chart and see how the effects that I'm going to be talking about are going to be affecting your chart. So the sun is in 5 degrees 7 minutes in Aries, the full moon in 5 degrees 7 minutes Libra. So that means whatever you have in Aries and Libra is going to be most affected by this eclipse. Within about 10 degrees on either side, look at what house cusps and planets you have, and those planets and house cusps are going to be receiving these effects of the eclipse. And that goes into Pisces, so into about 25 degrees Pisces and also 25 degrees Virgo, up into 15 degrees Libra and then 15 degrees Aries. Within those degree ranges, whatever planets and house cusps you have, those are what this eclipse is going to be affecting the most. So take a look at your chart and reflect upon these themes that we're going to be talking about and see what planets and house cusps it's going to be affecting. So talking about eclipses, it's a very complex subject, and there's a very important technique that we should be using that's coming into greater consciousness now about how eclipse cycles work. Because traditionally, eclipses are seen as these wild card events because they're happening next to the two malefic planets, or the two nodes of the moon, Rahu, the north node, and Ketu, the south node. And those are the subconscious energies that stir us up from deep within us, these urges that we have to evolve into life. And they're subconscious until we become conscious of them, but they cause us certain kinds of turmoil. So when the sun and moon are near those nodes, the eclipses happen, and these eclipses can stir up our lives in very unpredictable ways. And finding the results and predicting the results of them has typically been difficult to do. They're kind of like the joker in the pack. Anything can happen. But with this technique of eclipse cycles, we can look at the beginning of the cycle and mark what was the first eclipse in the cycle and use that first eclipse as a birth chart for the entire eclipse cycle. Now, this cycle is called the Saros cycle, and Ernst Wilhelm has started to use it in the past year or 2 years. And it's a really amazing technique, and I'm going to put a video in the description of this video with a discussion that he has with Dustin Cormier, another Vedic astrologer, about the fundamentals of how the cycle works. But essentially, it's a 1200-year cycle of about 70 eclipses that happen within 18-year intervals. So every 18 years, the same eclipse identity, you could say, the same eclipse flavor is going to happen every 18 years. And the eclipse that starts the cycle is going to be a very partial eclipse that happens either it's only visible at the North Pole or only visible at the South Pole. And every 18 years they get closer and closer to the equator, and the duration of the eclipse visible in the sky increases, which increases the intensity of the eclipse. And in the middle of the cycle is when the intensity is greatest of this eclipse. And this cycle we're in for this particular lunar eclipse was in the mid-1500s, so we're on the waning aspect of the intensity of this cycle. You can think about it as a waxing and waning cycle, similar to the moon. So what we're going to do is now study that initial eclipse chart and see the flavor, the identity of this entire cycle, and then relate those themes in that initial eclipse chart, that foundational eclipse chart, into what the current chart is. So let's take a look at that initial chart. So as you can see, the sun is at 13 degrees 38 minutes in Taurus at the top, on the top towards the right, and at the bottom you see that new moon at 13 degrees 38 minutes in Scorpio. So this is our initial eclipse chart. It happened on May 3rd, 1888 AD. So as I said, we're at the tail end of this 1200-year eclipse cycle. But let's take a look at this foundational eclipse. So as you can see, we have a very intense chart here because principally of this Pluto-Uranus opposition right in the eclipse path. Now that is very intense because these two outer planets can have very destructive tendencies, and particularly Pluto. Pluto is a very intense energy, and we'll talk about that right now, and then we'll go into Uranus. So Pluto in Taurus, only a degree and a half away from the Sun, is saying that in Taurus, the sign of our material stability, the sign of our responsibilities, our economic capabilities, what we do for work, the ability to work hard, and essentially everything we do in our material life, which is such a huge theme in our day and age, that our material security it's what's on everyone's mind all the time, essentially. Taurus is such a major sign it's such an important sign for our day and age, for the Kali Yuga. Being right in that eclipse path, Pluto is the planet of the imbalances in power and the way that power structures need to be realigned through destruction, and then the rebirth of another system of being. And that can mean the destruction of a certain aspect of your consciousness and removing spiritual grossness from your own consciousness through destroying those negative aspects of your psyche, so that new things can be born from them. And in Taurus, that means that there are power structures, there are material systems that are creating imbalances of power through coercion, through manipulation, through dark tactics, through shadowy machinations, you could say, that this eclipse cycle is bringing out into the open, the need for certain things to be destroyed. And you can think of Pluto kind of as the shadowy side of Mars. Mars having the warrior mentality, wanting to fight with things and wanting to use cunning and using the ability for strategy in order to achieve one's goals. And that is it's a very problem-solving and intense kind of energy to remove an obstacle from life. Pluto does that in a very dramatic way. So this alignment of Pluto being in Taurus in the eclipse path is bringing a destructive kind of drama into this eclipse cycle. On the other end, in opposition to Uranus, Uranus is the abrupt things happening, ideas that come into our consciousness seemingly out of nowhere, and the ability to have a very innovative new idea that brings us closer to a truer understanding of ourselves personally, or on a societal scale, an idea whose time has come that needs to be implemented and that needs to be addressed, because it's just time for that idea to be out in the open. So Uranus being in Scorpio, that is bringing about the sudden awareness of psychological and emotional vulnerabilities. And the sudden awareness of these dark sides of our psyche is going to shake up the way we look at ourselves in the material sense. So in a way, by noticing certain things about yourself, or noticing certain irregularities or emotional hang-ups and difficulties a person has psychologically, it's saying that this is much more important than anything I have in the material sense. All the material things I could have could one day go away, and what I'm left with is this awareness that I have something deep in my psyche that needs to be addressed. And this eclipse cycle brings out the sudden awareness of that emotional imbalance, and again, the imbalance of power that is at play caused by Pluto. So who are you without material security? And Uranus is bringing that awareness, in that the deeper aspect of yourself is that psychological stability is, at the end of the day, far more important, because you could have tons of material stability, but eventually the material life, it ends up getting destroyed, and noticing certain things about yourself that need to be changed becomes much more urgent and important once you become aware of them. So this eclipse cycle can cause sudden realizations that the status quo is no longer sustainable emotionally and also materially. And looking back into history, when this cycle was peaking during the 1500s, there were, during the months that this eclipse cycle was happening, there were a lot of new treaties being made and new agreements, new popes getting put into Rome, and deals being made between countries, and setting up treaties that said, okay, we can't do it as we used to do it. We have a new way of going about. We have a new agreement to be made, and you can see Venus there, far away from the eclipse. In Gemini, Venus is that negotiation, that softening up of relations, and let's come to an agreement where both sides can win. So in the peak times for this eclipse, we're seeing that the old cycle ending, or not the old cycle, the old way of doing things ending, Pluto, the destruction of something new, and a new way of doing things coming into play, a rebirth of a new awareness, a new system. And during one of these times, I have to look back into it, what year exactly it was, but it's when Cortez came and landed into the Americas. There you had the old way of life, the old way of doing things was suddenly changed, and as he made his way through the Americas, all of the destruction of the old way of life that he and his army of conquistadors committed to the people that were in the Americas. So we have a whole destructive new system within about a month of when this eclipse happened at its peak time in the 1500s. So what this cycle, and I'm going to get into Saturn here in a second, but what this cycle is saying is that new systems are going to be made from destruction of old systems, and it's going to have a very practical material effect on people. And included in that are the sudden awarenesses of vulnerabilities and fears within our psyches that we come into our consciousness seemingly out of nowhere, and that's being caused by Uranus in Scorpio. But as you see, we have Saturn rearing his ugly head within this chart, and he's squaring the eclipse. So what that's saying is that the limit has been reached. There's that square aspect is that kind of blocking where it says, yep, we've come to an impasse, something has to change, and that change is not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long term, and it's going to require a lot of hard work, and it's not going to be something that people necessarily want to do. Saturn is not making these needs for changes on a material and emotional level any easier. So that bringing of limitation, that awareness of death, the need for certain things in us to die, for something else to be born within us, and the sudden awareness that death is a real possibility in life, and a lot of people don't contemplate about death. And I'm saying death because Saturn and Pluto have that same significance. Pluto being the death of a certain identity and certain parts of our identity, and the removal of psychological tendencies that must be removed, and Saturn being the limits of our body. And when we reach the limit of our body, we die. So Saturn is really throwing not throwing a wrench in, but he's really bringing into stark awareness, throwing a realism into this whole situation, that this process is going to take time to accomplish, and it's not going to be a fluid and easygoing change that we're undergoing. And as the example of the conquistadors, the conquering of America was a long-term process, and it caused a lot of destruction. And a new system was put into place as a result. But the silver lining of it is that we have, as you can see, Jupiter there exalted. Jupiter exalted brings a little bit more comfort into this eclipse cycle, that there is a deep-seated, the realization that there's a deep-seated spiritual purpose to all of it. And being able to look at the bird's eye view of things, seeing that psychological growth is necessary, overcoming vulnerabilities, and being able to detach yourself from your own emotional vulnerabilities and see that there is a larger scheme, there's a larger purpose at work, and that purpose is spiritual development. So behind the scenes, behind the difficulties and the shock waves of waking up to a reality, waking up to a fear that you've had all along, the Jupiter there sextiling, not in a very tight aspect, but sextiling the eclipse and trining the moon there, or sextiling the sun and trining the moon, does show that there is some comfort to be had in terms of Jupiter's blessings, those that kind of grace that can befall us, and that grace being psychological maturity and being able to see that there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel, although it's not going to be easy. So that's the general context. We have a very intense eclipse cycle that eclipse is a part of. And it's going to have to do with all those themes I discussed, and the principal ones being that Pluto-Uranus opposition. So how does that relate to the current eclipse, which is happening on the 25th? So with those themes in mind, let's look at the chart for the 25th. So here we have the eclipse on the 25th, and we're talking about the axis of Aries and Libra, so the dichotomy of doing things myself and then working with other people. Libra being the sign of trade and negotiation, where the full moon is. Pluto, since we have such a Plutonian eclipse in this cycle, let's first look at Pluto. Pluto is at 1 degrees 45 minutes in Aquarius, and he is in a much more harmonious position. He's in sextile position to the sun, and he's in a 270 degree relationship with the moon. So that's a much more fluid aspect, thankfully, because that is showing us that in the context of this eclipse cycle, Pluto is going to be showing us things that, yes, I do need to change that in my life. There are certain aspects of my psyche that need to be destroyed, but it's something that, yeah, I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm aware of it, and also it won't be as difficult as it could have been. So that destructive element is tempered a little bit. And actually, it can be a kind of destruction we feel good about. We want to be doing. It's something that, again, its time has come and we're ready for the change to be made. And that change, during this eclipse, there's the opportunity to remove things from your psyche, to expel and to detox out of us, because Pluto is in a much more harmonious position. So we do have an opportunity with this eclipse to say, yep, I'm getting rid of that bad habit, or I'm going to make the necessary long-term, the decision for the long-term change, so that I can find new elements of myself and remove that spiritual grossness from me. So Pluto is helping in this context on the 25th. We're going to be able to see certain things that need to be destroyed in our psyche, and then work towards doing that. Sometimes it gets forced upon us, and sometimes it is a decision that we make. And in this context, I think it's going to be the coming to awareness that, yes, I have this opportunity to make this change. I'm going to make this change. And part of what that change is going to be the breaking down of certain illusions and self-deceptions that are present in yourself, but also what society has about themselves, that we were kidding ourselves. We were doubling and tripling down on certain things that were simply us lying to ourselves. And that's because Neptune is at 27 degrees in Pisces in the eclipse range of influence. So it's going to be a Neptunian eclipse. So dealing with what about ourselves, and what are we lying to ourselves about, and the need to destroy those lies, to get rid of the illusions and become more. And Neptune gives that possibility of spiritual development and being able to use what we have, use the awareness of ourselves as a divine being, and using our imagination to propel us into heightened states of awareness. And I think that this eclipse can also be presenting people with very vivid dreams and being able to visualize things on a clearer level. Depends on what your situation in life is, because the people who are deceiving themselves, those self-deceptions can be even more profound. But when we're being real with ourselves, when we have a realistic outlook, we can envision a better life for ourselves. So this is going to be also a very Neptunian eclipse on the 25th. We also have Venus exalted in Pisces. So again, that gives a nice cushion, and Venus is not getting torn up by the eclipse path as what sometimes can happen, which can throw turmoil into our relationships, the inability to evaluate things with clarity, getting a bad deal and feeling that we've been cheated in some way. Well, Venus being exalted outside of the eclipse path helps us see the new deal that we want to make with ourselves and say that, yes, this is going to benefit me. This is going to make me feel better about myself. I'm going to increase my sense of value because of the changes that I'm making on that fundamental level, the changes that need to happen in me. Getting rid of those illusions. Yeah, that's a good deal for me to make. So Venus is helping the eclipse, and also Mercury is far from the eclipse path. He's at 23 degrees Aries, and when we're judging eclipses, we judge the sun and moon's position, not the node's position. So Mercury, again, is not going to be torn up by the eclipse as much as it could be. Mercury is usually always somewhere in there, close to the eclipse point, and this time around, Mercury is going to give us the capacity to see things more or less objectively, from a clear way, being able to assess things with logic, and not feeling that we are either trapped with too many options or being unable to see options. That's what happens a lot with eclipses. As I said, they're so unpredictable, and a lot of that comes with Mercury always being eclipsed. So I can't see my way forward. I don't know what to do, and things are just happening to me. Well, this time around, Mercury is not getting affected as hard, so the options and the ability to navigate through life is going to be a bit better. We're going to have that ability to be able to see things with clarity, more so than during other eclipse periods. So that's it for this particular eclipse that is coming up on the 25th in the context of the larger cycle. And again, it's really important that you look in your own chart and seeing what house cusps, what areas of life it's going to be affecting, and then in what planets are in that eclipse path, and what planets or what forces in your consciousness that are going to be affected as well. So that's going to color your particular chart and your experience with the eclipse. And I'm going to be doing a follow-up video about the solar eclipse that's going to be happening in just 2 weeks after this lunar eclipse. So stay tuned for that solar eclipse video. And again, we're going to be studying the natal chart of that eclipse cycle along with the current eclipse that's happening in 2024. And then as the weeks come on, I want to be doing more eclipse videos on really breaking down the structure of how the eclipse cycle works. And then also we have the big Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happening in Taurus coming up in mid-April, which I believe is going to kind of put a cherry on top of all of these effects that are happening during these 2 eclipses we have here in March and April. Okay, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the solar eclipse video coming up.